This is just a few words on interviews and focus groups. So first, I'd like to talk about creating your interview protocol or guidelines. So basically, there's two kinds of interviews when you're talking about interviewing a single person, and those are structured interviews and semi-structured interviews. Semi-structured interviews are probably what you are the most familiar with. In a semi-structured interview, you have a list of questions, but if there's something that comes up that you want to follow up on, if something occurs to you in the moment, you're welcome to add those questions in a semi-structured interview. A structured interview, on the other hand, asks exactly the same questions, no more, no less, in exactly the same way to your interview participants. So it's almost like you're reading a survey to them. It's that structured. And in fact, if they ask you for additional information or clarification, you really just stick to repeating the questions that are there. Now, there's benefits to doing a semi-structured interview. There are benefits to doing a structured interview. I just wanted to let you know that there really are those two types. So the next step, once you decide if you're doing semi-structured or structured interviews, is to go ahead and create your interview protocol or your guide for your interview or your focus groups. And again, just as a reminder, focus groups are basically group interviews, as opposed to when we say interview, we're generally talking about one person. So whether you're talking about a single person being interviewed or a group of people being interviewed, you want to go ahead and create your interview protocol or your interview guide. So here's what you're going to do. First of all, I strongly recommend that you write out your introduction. And the reason that I want you to write out your introduction is so that you don't forget to say anything to anyone. A written out introduction, a script for your introduction, will guarantee that each of your interview participants gets exactly the same information. So in addition to the regular things that you might want to include in your introduction, such as what's the purpose of this evaluation and how's the information going to be used and about how long is this interview going to take, in addition to all that, you want to be sure to let the participant know that you're going to be taking notes, and that the reason that you're taking notes is so that you can have the information when you're done interviewing, when you're compiling and analyzing the information. If you are planning to record the interview, you also want to ask them for their permission to record it. And then related to both of these two bullets is that final third bullet, which is you want to make sure that you share the parameters on confidentiality with them and how you will be handling your notes and recordings. So if the confidentiality agreement that you have made with whoever else, whether it's a key stakeholder, anyone that you're interacting with in the organization, the agreement that you've made with them on confidentiality is what needs to be shared. So if you have agreed that no one is going to listen to the recording and no one is going to see your notes but you, then that's what you can tell your interview participants. If you have agreed that you're going to share all this information with the organization, then that's what you need to let your interview participants know. So the purpose of letting them know the confidentiality, what's going to be happening in terms of confidentiality, what's going to be happening in terms of the notes and the recordings that you're making, the purpose of that is so that they're aware of what's going to happen to the information they provide you before they provide it. So those are three things that you want to make sure that you include as part of your written out introduction. So for individual interviews, you're going to want to write out all your questions. And if you are doing a semi-structured interview, you want to go ahead and consider writing possible follow-up prompts. So you have a question, and maybe if they say yes, you go in this follow-up direction. If they say no, you go in this follow-up direction. Or if they say a particular answer to the question, you might have some follow-up questions that you want to ask. The other thing that you might want to consider for your note-taking is you can either write out your questions and leave space after each question so that you can take notes, or you might want to put all of your questions on one sheet numbered so that then you can take notes on a pad of paper and number so that you know which answer, which comments go to which question. So whichever of those ways makes the most sense for you for gathering notes, that's what I encourage you to do. Now, if you're doing group interviews or focus groups, you definitely want to write out all of your questions as well. There is no such thing. Well, I don't know if that's true, but most of the time, 99.5% of the time, you're going to be doing semi-structured interviews with focus groups. And then finally, write your closing statement. Make sure that you have a nice, clear way for yourself to end the interview, including thanking the person or people that are being interviewed for their time. So that's creating your interview protocol. Next thing we're going to talk about is capturing your interview data. So I strongly recommend that you both record your interviews and that you take notes. And here's why. Because recordings fail. Sometimes you think you're recording and it has stopped recording, or the recording gets corrupted, or you accidentally delete the recording at some point. So your notes can serve as a backup to your recording, just as your recording can serve as a backup to your notes. It's better to have both and decide you don't need both than to have one and wish you had the other. So I strongly recommend that you both record and take notes, as long as, of course, you have permission from the person or people that you're interviewing to record and take notes. All right, so for individual interviews, what you're going to do is you're going to take notes and then you're going to record so that you can transcribe for future reference. What I recommend for group interviews or focus groups is that you bring another person to take notes, and then you also record so that you can transcribe later or use it for reference. Here's why I suggest you bring another person to a focus group. Imagine that you're leading a focus group of 6 people. So there's 6 people in the room, all interested to participate in this conversation. You ask your first question and all 6 people start talking. So as they're all talking, you're trying to pay attention to each of them. You're trying to make sure that you have the opportunity to clarify what each of them are saying. You want to make sure you have good follow-up questions based on what each of them are saying. It's too much to manage the focus group discussion and to take the notes. What happens is if you try to do both, one or the other suffers. So either your notes are not nearly good enough because you're focused on the discussion, or your discussion is not nearly good enough because you're focused on the notes. And the way to take care of that is to just bring somebody else in who can take notes on the conversation for you. Now, let's talk a little bit about transcribing. So when you transcribe, I recommend that you use some sort of digital recording. So that might be an actual digital tape recorder. This is just an example of one digital tape recorder, but there are many on the market. Or you might decide that you're going to use your smartphone to do digital recording, your smartphone or a tablet or something like that. There are many apps available for recording. Here's one that I like. I'm not saying it's the best one out there, but it's the one that I use. And this is called Voice Recorder Free, and it's an app that's available on iOS. I don't have an Android device, so I don't know what a good app is for an Android device, but you can just search the web for best voice recorder Android, and you'll see all kinds of people's ideas, and then you can look at them and decide which one makes sense for you. So whether you're doing a digital recorder, whether you're using your smartphone or tablet, a digital recording is really going to help you in the long run. Now, because we're doing digital recording, there's many different file types or file formats that digital recordings can be made in. The 2 most popular are WAV and MP3. And I want to mention these because some of your digital recorders, many of your smartphone apps will give you the option of which format you want to record in. So I just wanted to briefly talk about that. A WAV format is a format that includes every piece of information about the audio recording. So every sound, everything is included in a WAV file. Because of that, WAV files are huge. So the good news is all the information's there. The bad news is They're huge. And it's maybe not such a bad news if you're using a digital recorder, but if you're recording on your smartphone, you may have a limited amount of space on your smartphone or your tablet that you can record to. The second file that's listed here is MP3, which I'm sure you've heard of before. And an MP3 is what's referred to as a lossy format. And what that means is an MP3 file is compressed. It's pushed together and made smaller. And the way that they make it smaller is by actually removing pieces of information from the audio file. Now, the software that does this, the compression that makes it an MP3 file, is smart enough to not take out critical information, but it is in fact losing information from that file. You don't have all of the audio that was actually recorded. The good news about an MP3 file is that it is significantly smaller than a WAV file. It depends on the compression ratios and all of that, but it's not unusual for an MP3 file to be half the size of a WAV file. So if for another purpose, some other project, you're recording some music and you're going to be doing something with that music, or you're going to be using that file as a performance, you might want to record that as a WAV file so that all of that rich musical information is there. But when you're talking about speech, which is what we're going to be doing for interviews, for most of us, to our ears, we can't even tell a difference between WAV and MP3. So I encourage you to do your recording as an MP3 file, because even though it's a lossy format, it's compressed, some of that information won't be there, you're not even going to be able to hear it. You're not even going to be able to tell the difference. And you're not performing this anyway. This is just information that's there for you so that you can transcribe it into typed words, or so that you can use it to support your note taking. So digital recording with a recorder or a smartphone app. Now, the microphones on recorders and smartphone apps on smartphones are pretty darn good. So what you might want to do for your project is simply use your microphone that comes built into the digital recorder or the smartphone. At some point, you might want to use microphones. So I just want to talk a little bit about microphones. So there's several different kinds of microphones that you can use with either a digital recorder or a smartphone. The first one that I have pictured here is a lavalier microphone. Most of you are probably familiar with these. They clip on your lapel typically, and this is what people use when they stand at a podium or when they have it in their pocket and walk around the room, and so that their voice gets recorded. I like lavalier mics if I'm going to use a mic, because they do a pretty good job and they're kind of cheap. So I like them for that purpose. So whether you're using a lavalier mic or whether you're just using the built-in mic on your digital recorder or your smartphone, you don't have to clip it to the person's shirt. What I encourage you to do is to place your microphone or your recorders in the place that makes the most sense to get the best recording. So very often I'll have a tripod in between me and the person that I'm interviewing, and I'll clip the lavalier mic right to that. Or I'll have a stack of books and I'll put my digital recorder on that stack of books in between us. The idea is that you want to get the microphone positioned so that it's as close to the person's mouth as possible, as well as close to your mouth so you can hear what you're asking them, and able to pick up everybody's voices. So typically in a one-person interview, that's in a raised place right in between the two of you. If you are doing a focus group, you might have this in a central area if people are sitting around a table, for example. So that's a lavalier mic. You can, speaking of focus groups, you can, with many of the smartphone apps and digital recorders, have more than one mic. You've probably seen for your headphones those splitters. So one pin goes into the smartphone and two connectors come out. You can, depending on your smartphone app and your digital recorder, connect two lavalier mics. And that gives you the opportunity, if you're doing a focus group, for example, to spread those mics around the table so that you have the best chance of getting everyone's voice. Now, in addition to lavalier mics, there are some mics that just connect directly in through that pin right to your digital recorder or to your smartphone. And then there are also condenser mics that are available for smartphones and digital recorders. And so these mics typically pick up a larger area and are slightly higher quality. Again, that's of the quality is of less concern for us because we're doing voice recording just for our own benefit. But if you're doing a focus group, this might be a good way to make sure that you're getting the voices of everyone in the room recorded. And speaking of focus groups, there are also some tabletop microphones available that do a much better job of capturing large groups of people. And most of these can also be daisy chained together so that you can have microphones set on the tables all around the room. But for your project, it could be that just the digital recorder or the smartphone app is plenty good enough. Now, one other way that we sometimes record is when we're interviewing an online call or an online video conference call. Now, if you're using a video conference package that's available through some organization or through some company, it may have built-in recording features. So that's something that you'll need to check with whoever IT support for that video conference package is. If you're using Google Hangouts, which is available to anyone who has a Gmail email or a Google Plus account, you can use Google Hangouts, and Google Hangouts has a built-in recorder. So now that we've captured our interview data, let's talk about transcribing it. So transcribing and coding your interview data, really there's two ways you can do it. One way is to transcribe it and then go ahead and code it and do your analysis. So you transcribe your interviews and then you use that transcription, which are the exact words that people used in their interviews, in your coding and your analysis. Another way to do it is to code from your notes, from your field notes. If you're going to code from your notes, what I recommend is that you review your notes and then you play the recording as you're looking at your notes, and you use that recording to clarify and supplement your notes. In the heat of the moment, you may have missed some things that you wanted to include in your notes. And then you use those notes in your coding and your analysis. So again, when you code from your field notes, you are not transcribing. So you are not coding the exact words that the person in the interview said. You're coding your notes on what that person said. So no surprise, there's some challenges with that. The first challenge is the quality of your note-taking impacts the quality of the data. The only data that you have to code are whatever notes you wrote down. And so if your note-taking isn't very good, if you're not a very experienced note-taker, what you're going to end up with is less high-quality data. Or as it says in that second bullet point, your data might be fairly thin. And what I mean by thin is it may be fairly surface. You might not have the richness or the depth. You certainly don't have the exact words in most cases that the person used. You also don't have the quantity of the data. No matter how many notes you take, you're probably not writing down every single thing the person said. So a transcribed interview is going to give you a much larger quantity of data to analyze than notes are. And then finally, when you take notes, you are introducing bias and misrepresentation into your notes. So first of all, the fact that you either did or did not record something is a form of bias. The fact that you thought this was important enough to write down or not important enough to write down and take notes on is a form of bias. You don't know that the person thought this was important and this wasn't important. Secondly, the words that you use are very often not direct quotes in your notes. You can use direct quotes, but most of the time what you're doing, because you're trying to interview and take notes all at the same time, is you're summarizing and you're paraphrasing. So the words that you chose to use, the interpretation that you chose to place on what the person said as you're summarizing, that's what you're now going to be coding instead of the exact words that they used. And then finally, sort of in the moment, you might misunderstand what they said. You might miscapture what they said. Now, some of these challenges can be not erased, but minimized by reviewing your notes while you're listening to the recording, because you then can add to your notes. So field notes are never going to be as good as transcribed notes, as transcribed interviews, but you can minimize those challenges. But if you are coding from field notes, if you are not transcribing, you must consider this as you're moving through your analysis to your conclusions and your recommendations. You have to remember and acknowledge that you are coding your notes based on what the person said. You are not coding exactly what the person said. So you can see from this, there are some serious disadvantages of coding from field notes. So why would we ever want to code from field notes? Because transcribing takes a lot of time. So what you need to decide is, am I more concerned about the accuracy and quality of the data that I get from what that person said in that interview? Or is it more important, is it good enough for me to use my field notes in the interest of speed? So let's talk a little bit about transcription. There's basically two ways to transcribe. One is to pay somebody to transcribe it for you, and the other is to do it yourself. So when you pay someone to transcribe for you, this could be a professional service. It could be someone associated with your university or associated with your community who just does this as a side income. I think most people who transcribe charge per page. And the reason I say I think is because I don't pay to have my stuff transcribed. And I transcribe my information, my interviews myself. And there's two reasons that I do this. The main reason, the first reason, is because although it costs me time, it doesn't cost me money. And it's fairly expensive to have things transcribed, as I understand it. But the other reason that I like to transcribe my own interviews is because as I'm transcribing, it's another way for me to really immerse myself in this data. It's another way for me to get a deep review of what the person or the people said in my interviews. So while I'm transcribing, I'm reviewing it. While I'm going back and correcting my inevitable typos, I'm immersing myself in it. So it's just a great way to get connected to your data. So if you decide to transcribe it yourself, I have a few suggestions. The first is the way that you transcribe it. So the worst possible way to transcribe is to take your digital recorder or to take your phone and press play and then try to start typing, and then when you get behind, click on the digital recorder or the smartphone app and press stop, and it'll take you forever to do it that way. I recommend that you use a piece of software. The best free software, in my opinion, is Express Scribe Transcription Software free. Now, the free version is only available for non-commercial use, and it has a few less features than their pro version. So if you decide that you want to do transcribing for commercial purposes, or if you decide that you want whatever those missing features are, you might decide to go ahead and pay. If you decide to pay, there's many transcription packages that are available for a fee, but this is the best one, I think, for free. And I don't even know what the other features are in the pro version because everything I need is available in the free version. So let me just briefly talk through what happens. So a window opens up, you get to open or load your audio file from your interview. And then on screen, there's a play button, and you press the play button and you go ahead and start typing. And there are shortcut keys that you can use to stop, to forward, and to play, and to review. So if, for example, you press the play button, you start typing, you get a little bit behind, you can either take your fingers off the key and move the mouse and press the stop or the pause button, or you can use the shortcut key, which is F9 or something like that. So it's much faster to use transcription software. The other benefit of transcription software is you have the ability to slow down or speed up the recording. So if you cannot type as fast as people speak, and most of us can't, you have the ability to slow down the playback so that it more closely matches your typing speed. Now, the reason that I'm not really clear as to what the shortcut keys are in Express Scribe is because I don't use the shortcut keys. I use a foot pedal, and if there's any way for you to beg, borrow, or steal a foot pedal, I encourage you to do it because it really makes transcribing so much faster. So this is a USB foot pedal. This is the one that I use. There's a limited number of foot pedals that actually work with the free version of Express Scribe. So this one's called Alto Edge. And it looks like it's a solid pedal, but it's kind of has a rocker motion. So this pedal, you can click on the left side, you can click in the middle, and you can click on the right side. So here's what I do when I'm transcribing. The foot pedal is on the floor underneath my right foot. My window is open. I slow down the recording to where it is talking about as fast as I can type. I start typing. When I get a little bit behind, I just push my foot down on the middle part of the foot pedal. It pauses the recording till I get caught up. I push down again, it starts playing again. So I never have to take my fingers off the keys to press a shortcut key or to reach for the mouse. I'm doing the starting, the stopping, and the rewinding with my foot. So let's say I was typing along, I got a little bit behind, so I pushed the middle of the pedal so that it stops, and then I want to go back a little bit because I missed something. I just push on the left side and it rewinds, and when I'm done rewinding, or when I've rewound as far as I would like, I lift my foot up, I press it in the middle so that it starts playing again. So all of the controls of the video are under my feet. All my fingers have to do is stay on the keys and type. This has made transcription so much easier for me. So again, if you are transcribing, I encourage you to use Express Scribe transcription software free. And if you know someone who has a pedal that you can borrow, I encourage you to do that. Quick summary then for interviews and focus groups. First of all, you're going to create your interview protocol or guide. You'll decide if you're doing semi-structured or structured interview. You'll write out your introduction, your questions, and your closing statement. Then you'll conduct your interviews. And as you conduct your interviews, you're going to record and take notes. And I strongly recommend that another person takes the notes in your focus groups. And then finally, you'll transcribe and code your interviews. And as it says on the screen, you may decide that it's fine to code from your notes instead of transcribing the recording, but just remember that relying on field notes has a negative impact on both the quality and the quantity of the data that you'll have available to use as you analyze. So that is a summary of what you need to do for interviews and focus groups.